All right, guys. We are on Unit 22, Session 3 this week. We're moving right through this unit on Jesus' superiority, his authority over all things, ultimately. And so we've talked about his authority over nature. Um, I didn't do a video last week, so I'm not quite sure what the video was last week as far as what the curriculum was. Forgive me for that. But this week we're talking about Jesus over sickness. So Jesus over sickness, which is Jesus did a lot of miracles, and a lot of his miracles were healing people of their infirmities, their sicknesses, and just shows God's power over our bodies, God's power to heal. And Jesus, as he's walking and he's preaching and teaching, he also is healing people, um, which yes, they needed physical healing, but we ultimately know that excuse me we ultimately know that his healing power and what we need in our lives is his ability to heal our hearts, his ability to save us, to bring what is dead and to bring it back to life. So just want to study this passage with you in Matthew chapter 9. Jesus is sort of on this healing spree, if you will. This healing spree, if we will. I mean, it's pretty incredible what he does in this passage. But it starts in verse 18. Um, Excuse me. I am all kinds of messed up in this video. Yawning and sneezing. My goodness. You can tell it's a Thursday, right? So, anyways, but it starts in verse 18 um, with a man who approaches Jesus saying that his daughter has just died. And it's actually interrupted by another story. And then he picks back up and finishes that story. And then verses 27 through 31 is a different story as well. So it's three stories um, that we're looking at. But the first point is that Jesus responds to humble faith. Jesus responds to humble faith, and this is the story about Jairus's daughter. It's a man named Jairus, and he had a daughter whose daughter was dead. And he comes before Jesus. He kneels down before him, and he explains what's happened. Um, and I think this posture that this man assumes, as far as kneeling down, face to the ground, is one. It's in recognition of who Jesus is. That's the first thing. And then also it's a recognition of who he is before Jesus. So he recognizes Jesus's worthiness and he recognizes his unworthiness at the same time. And for many of us, we always know that I think it's the book of Hebrews tells us that we can approach the throne of God boldly and confidently because he's gone before us. But I think sometimes we forget this idea of reverence, this idea of humility before God. And this man approaches Jesus and he has all the faith in the world, but he humbly approaches him. And Jesus honors that. He recognizes that this man not only knows who he is, being the Son of God, Jesus, but he also knows that he's unworthy. And you see that Jesus admires that about him just because he knows who he is before God. And so that story is verses 18 through 19, and then verses 23. Doggone it. I'm sorry, y'all. Need to drink some coffee or something. But verses 18 through 19, and then verses 23 through 25. And that's the story of Jairus's daughter. But then in Matthew chapter 9, verses 20 through 22, we see the story of this woman who had been bleeding for a long time. And our point here is that Jesus responds to bold faith. Jesus responds to bold faith. This woman would have been considered unclean. She probably smelled really bad. It was not like someone that people wanted to be around. And so she would not be out in the public a whole lot. But she knows who Jesus is. He has heard about him. And she boldly leaves her home and goes and approaches Jesus and just falls before him. And Jesus says, have courage, daughter. Your faith has saved you. In other words, your boldness for coming and approaching me, despite what other people said, despite of whether you knew you'd be healed or not, you knew that I had the ability to save you. Jesus responds to a bold faith that we have. And that's what faith looks like a lot of times for us every day. It's understanding that only God and who he is can save us. Only God and who he is um, can put us where we need to be, And so we have to have bold faith as we approach him. And then in verses 27 through 31, we see that Jesus heals two blind men. Not three blind mice, but two blind men. Jesus responds to desperate faith. These men come up to Jesus and they said, "Have mercy on us, son of David." And it says, when Jesus entered the home, the blind men approached him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I can do this?" And they said, "Yes, Lord." Then they touched their eyes. Then he touched their eyes, saying, "Let it be done for you according to your faith." And their eyes were open. I mean, these men were desperate for healing, and I don't think these words are just strictly exclusive to these stories. I think all of these stories encompass a humble faith, a bold faith, and a desperate faith. And that's we have to have those aspects of our faith as well. Um, we have to humbly approach the Lord, but we at the same time have to boldly approach Him, and our faith in the manner in which we do so should be desperate for His presence, desperate for His touch, desperate for um, Him to do with us what we cannot do ourselves. Right. And so as you're talking about this with students, I hope you challenge them of like, how desperate are you for God? How desperate are you to see Him move in your life and in your own mission field that you have right now, whether it's in your schools or in your family or whatever it may be. Um, so, anyways, I hope this helps you guys, and thank you so much for what you do. You guys are MVPs. You guys are awesome. So, thank y'all. Have a great week, and we'll see y'all on Sunday.